I have the pleasure of saying a few things about Ayse and being her introducer. So she is an industrial designer and an author, but there are some things that you're not going to be able to probably Google about her that I want to share. She is known as the Queen of Toilets, okay, because of her work with Toto. She's also known as Queen Bee for office systems for Herman Miller. And her third fantastic nickname is the Design Evangelista for the work that she did because she teaches everyone about design at all times.
Thank you.
You're welcome. And then I'll hand it over to Eli and David to introduce yourselves.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, can you hear me okay? So David Yonker, I'm with SAP. So I've got two functions at SAP. So I lead SAP Insights, which is a research group. So we do global studies of various sorts, global surveys, global foresight studies. I wear a second hat, which is to lead our awareness marketing efforts. So everything from campaigns to media partnerships with the Wall Street Journal, the New York Times, to big storytelling moments like the film we just saw. So that's me. Yeah.
And hi, I'm Eli Hallowell. I'm actually the chairman of Hair Story, co-founder. We hired a new CEO about 7 months ago.
I'm
He's
getting
doing a
all
great
the
job.
titles wrong, apparently.
That's
today.
okay. It's okay. I've been back and forth between operating businesses and investing in them. In 2015, I co-founded Hair Story, and the relevant fact there is that we founded it really as a company with a sustainable culture, a culture of sustainability. And I think my role today is going to be, I'm the voice of incrementality. It's easy to look at all of these amazing goals and say we can get there, and if you're running a business and trying to actually survive and make money, then for me, it's really about sustainability being a journey and not necessarily a destination. And every step along the way, you're just trying to improve and improve and improve.
I love that. Very important point. Instead of making sure everything is perfect before you put it out there in the market, right? All right, first question is for you, Ayse. In all of your design life, how do you educate the community through design?
So thank you for that. Hi, everyone. It's so good to be here. And I was nicknamed the Design Evangelista because I try to teach everyone how to design their life. And that is a great foil for teaching people how to think like a designer. Because design, as you know, is all about problem solving. And problem solving gives us hope. And those three women in that film, which was great, by the way, David, talked about hope. And Sean, you talk about hope. You give us hope in saying this problem is a gift. And that's what design really does, is it turns those problems into opportunities. And the differentiation comes from the process of design. How do you problem solve? So when we ask people what problems they have and we interview them, what we hear are the problems. But instead, if we ask them to create with us, and we have the users in the room thinking with us and using our tools to think creatively, that changes everything. So it is, in my mind, where ideally today design is a process that gives people the opportunity, your consumers, your users, to be in the room with you. So when I think of circularity of design, it's not only design and brand together anymore, but it also includes the user. And when we can do that, we build incredible empathy with our users, and they feel heard, they feel seen. And that, to me, is the, when we talk about circularity, that's the differentiation, is that the user could be part of our thinking.
That word empathy actually has come up in a few different conversations I've had. I think that is a very important one, empathy and trust, right?
Exact.
All right, next question. is for Eli. I would like to ask you how I love the positive message of many of the speakers so far, but how are you leading your company through disruptive ways of working in a positive fashion?
Well, I guess you just have to stay positive as you do it, generally. You have to believe yourself.
That's helpful.
You know, I think, so I said we created the business with a culture of sustainability. And what that meant from the beginning is that we needed the business to be self-sustaining. And that was an important message to tell the people early on. Like, yes, we want to do lots of things that are going to be great for the planet, and we're going to start off with a whole host of those, and we're going to add more in, but we can't do that until we can afford it. And that helped set expectations and created a culture where people were bought into the idea that we were working with them to improve the world. The next piece was that we said, well, we want you to have self-sustaining lives too. So we have to pay you appropriately, but we want you to take time off. We want you to have a good life. We want you to create a family. We want to create the space for all that. And when you bring that element in as well, then it creates a level of buy-in that the company actually really cares, not just about sustaining itself, but sustaining you. And then it gets people into the idea that, well, what can we do incrementally to help make the business more sustainable from a Earth perspective? You know, getting your consumers involved is really important, and we've done a bit of that, but just starting off with your employees is a great place to start, because suddenly, instead of one or two people having all the ideas, you've got the whole company bringing ideas. And that's really proven to be a great learning curve for us. You start off with the core elements, and then you earn your way to more and more programs and different ways of being sustainable.
That's amazing. It's a perfect segue, too, because I wanted to ask David about the role of the consumer and how do you bring them on this journey?
Yeah, great question. But before I jump into that, let me just sort of build on the idea of empathy and optimism. When we created the film, so this film that you saw it's one of a series of 8 films, and that we commissioned. And when we set out to create the films, you know, the goal was to we said, look, we want the films to be honest about the realities. Right? Like, don't gloss over the challenges that exist, and yet you still have to be hopeful, right? And I think that when we talk about some of the change that needs to happen, we have to be brutally honest about the realities, and yet also not lose hope, right? Because if you lose hope, it's easy to just say, well, we'll give up, right? There's nothing we can do about it. But there is stuff we can do about it if we continue to have hope. And so that's the thing that we have to sort of hold on to. Coming to consumers, if we sort of segue to that, there's an element of like incrementalism that needs to happen, right? Like we've done a number of studies looking at the business case for sustainability. So we've done a number of global surveys of businesses, right, and executives. What are their priorities? What are they thinking? Are they actually thinking about doing something? What does that look like? And then we've also studied consumers as well, right? And so if we start on the business side, what's clear is that the brutal reality is that right now businesses are sort of prioritizing in this order 3 things when it comes to sustainability. Dealing with regulation, right? They have to be regulated today in order to make a change. Reputation comes second. So they'll deal with reputational things. And then revenue's the third one. They are thinking about revenue, but it's lower on the list. They're still trying to figure out how to turn this into sort of a revenue-making opportunity. And so regulation dominates sort of the conversation at the moment. And the reason I think revenue is at the bottom actually brings us to the consumer side. So we did a study just heading into COVID. We were hoping to do it as a global study. It ended up just being North America because COVID hit, and then the data wasn't going to, anyway, there were lots of problems with the data if we continued to go global. But in North America, what was super clear was that there is a subset of the population, we call them the passionates, that are, well, passionate about making change. And they're across all the groups, right? They're from millennials and Gen Z and all the way up to boomers. So there's a section in all of them. But what was fascinating in the data is that while the passionates are looking at a lot of different dimensions, they're factoring in the board of an organization, the executive team, their points of view, are they trying to do good in the world, all that kind of stuff. At the end of the day, the thing, even with the passionates, that's still the top priority is price, quality of the product, right? And so while these other things sort of influence, whether you're passionate or you're not passionate, the things that matter the most when it comes to the products you buy are still the same. Product, price, product, so on and so forth. And that's the kind of the honest reality, right, that we're dealing with when we're trying to deal with sort of incrementally changing, to be honest.
Can I jump in on that for a second? One of the things that's been interesting for our business is our product cleans your hair, and it cleans your hair with no detergent. And so that is, very different. I think the analogy for me is it's like we're to shampoo what Oatly is to milk, kind of. We're this weird alternative that now everyone's heard of, but 10 years ago no one had. And there's an opportunity because it is so black and white. You can take an existing product and you can say, how do we do the same thing but do it better and cleaner? Or you can say, what's the outcome that we're trying to get to? In our case, clean hair. And how do you get there differently? So our product cleans your hair with just one application in the shower. And if you look at, we had our whole carbon footprint analyzed, every little thing, like how many times we walked to the bathroom, like every little teeny bit of energy that went into our business. And what really moves the needle is that people spend a third less time cleaning their hair in the shower. And it turns out that heating the water for that shower is the biggest impact on carbon. That cleaning your hair, that's the sort of biggest correlation. And so if you could create a solution that cuts the time in the shower, or requirement of time, because some people like to take showers and take more time, but if you can reduce that time, you can have the biggest impact. And so you layer onto that the fact that we made our packaging more sustainable and we've got the refills and all that stuff, and everyone else is starting to come along on those basics, but the sort of step function change comes from rethinking the actual problem that you're trying to solve versus just iterating on what the actual delivery mechanism or the packaging.
I think that's a great point, just looking at things differently, and it harkens back to the first panel even as well. Would you like to pipe in on that one too, Ayse?
I think I would. I want to use your product.
So do I, but I just I'm struggling.
My dad has as much hair as you, and it's great for your scalp to make it nice and healthy.
But I think we're just making the point that we're all same but different, And what's interesting is the same part helps us build empathy. We can be of different ages, cultures, genders, likes, but we basically, most of us, all want love, purpose, friendship, and well-being in our life. But yet we're different, and the difference that's where we can mine the differences to get to solutions. So there are two differences that I wanted to talk about. One is the data sets. For example, as a woman consumer, the data set is actually set against me and against us because we're not measured. And so because we're not measured, it has real consequences. For example, pianos are not measured and made for women, and that means that there's very few great pianists who are women in the world, not because they're not talented. It's because the products are not designed for that data set. Automobiles, test dummies are men. And so as a result, women have 47% more accidents. And those are, so when a woman has an accident, you can go back to think about that. Was that because it was a bad accident or because the product was not designed for that person? And if I may, one other piece of that is older people. So today we're living 20 to 30 years longer, And that time didn't exist before. So if we think of our grandparents, most people died in their 60s and 65. But today we have this whole era that has opened up that hasn't been designed. So I just wanted to say it's on us to now design great products for this era, which is our future. So I'll just...
I love that.
Stop
I always
there.
thought I was a bad driver. Or maybe I still am. Okay. That really made me feel good, though. I appreciate it.
Maybe you can be a bad driver and survive. It's like...
See, look how she's thinking about things so differently. So I wanted to ask you guys, too, about how in this economic environment we are in today, how do you make an argument for some of these changes that may cost more? That's for anyone. Jump in.
Yeah, if we look at, again, some of the data, the brutal reality, if you like, as I've talked with some of our, so if you don't know SAP, so SAP is, we're the largest enterprise application vendor out there. Our customers represent 86% of commerce around the world. So we've got a fairly significant footprint. All the big brands tend to run, their business on us. And so as I've personally talked with some of these bigger companies, and the research groups, some of my peers in some of those companies, what's clear is that, they're looking for that business case, but they're struggling because, in fact, actually, a lot of consumers say, I want you to be sustainable, but I'm not willing to pay for it. Right? Is there reality? So hence the reason the regulation is so important, actually, right? And what's happening in Europe is that consumers themselves are not there yet to say, I'm willing to fork out the extra dollars to make to buy these kinds of products, by and large, right? So it takes design at some level. There are some sub segments, right? Those with hair and but.
I have a counterpoint that I can keep going.
So there are sub-segments for sure, right? But by and large, some of these bigger companies aren't seeing that quite yet, right? And so as we get to designing, change in the system, it's a multifaceted challenge, right? We have to go from a regulation point of view. We have to continue to push on changing consumer attitudes, right, across general populations beyond specific segments, and it takes innovation in the businesses and the systems, So it's a holistic systems approach that's needed to solve this, pushing on multiple fronts, from my point of view, all at once. But
so I take everything there. I agree with everything you're saying. There's one piece that I would say is more of an option, and that is businesses need to self-sustain, which by definition means that they are cash generating. I don't believe that they necessarily need to be profit optimizing. And that's where, if the companies want to, they can do anything. There's a nice big gap between surviving and optimizing. And what we've done is we've said, well, we need to survive. We need to be able to make some money. And the customer, we don't need to ask them permission to pay more. We can give value, charge a bit more, move things around, offer higher margin products. But then what we're going to do is we're going to take some of that profitability and reinvest it in sustainability. And you have to have the willingness, and essentially you have to have the broader mandate of a business to say, we don't exist, or at the board level, we don't exist just to optimize the financial returns to the investors. We exist to have a broader impact, and that's the whole idea behind a B Corp and all these other things. And when you take that into consideration, I believe that if you ask them, yes, 100%, are you willing to pay more? No. I mean, they need to have, they want it all. They want the lowest price they can get, and they want to have sustainability, and they want it to be easy and delivered at their home in 5 minutes. They're willing to make trade-offs here and there, but if you can basically change the system for them and give them more sustainable options without necessarily asking, at the cost of some profitability, then you have the sort of flywheel where you get the authenticity. People start recognizing that you actually are trying because you didn't just charge them, you just did the right thing. And all of that starts to move in the right direction. Now, that being said, back to Sean's presentation, we still make lots of stuff that ends up in landfill. And I think one of the other things that companies need to recognize is that being in business takes resources. It uses resources. There's just no way about it. You can't just say, like, I want to create a great, I mean, one day maybe, but right now you can't say, I'm going to create a great company and I'm not going to impact the planet. You know, I personally have a hard time with the whole idea of zero waste in business. Like, I guess you can offset with carbon offsets, and that's how you can technically get there. But, like, let's be honest. It's consumption is consumption. It uses something. It uses resources. And so if you can understand all the complexity and just try to move forward one piece at a time, sometimes explicitly, sometimes behind the scenes, just saying this is the right thing to do, so we're going to do it, then I think you can, over time, build a business that can create value for the investors and end up with a better outcome. Is it perfect? No. It never will be perfect. It always has to evolve and get closer towards better. Never perfect.
Yeah, if that's okay, I'll jump on that. Yeah, and to be clear, you know, what I'm saying is specific to the data that we've seen, right? I'm a firm believer that change needs to happen, and I'm a firm believer too that, like, right now, I think that there's a lot of the early change is like, well, how do we just not change our systems, but just kind of like make the material sustainable, right? Like, it's that, like, let's not change too much, but let's change a bit, right? But where we really need to get to is where Sean was talking about, is actually we need a whole system change, right? Like, fundamentally rethink the way we think about goods and materials and so on and so forth. And I think to your point, right, like you know, someone's going to solve that problem, right? Like it's going to happen. Someone's going to come up with that right design, and it may be, you know, from a system point of view, but also from an organization point of view. Sometimes it's the organizations that don't have, you know, those quarterly profits that they need to hit, right, that feel they have the freedom to say, actually, I'm going to rethink my balance sheet, the way I think about the balance sheet and the way things get done, right? And those will be the disruptors, right? Those people that are willing to question some of the fundamental assumptions that we just sort of take for granted in how the system works.
Do we have time?
Yes, you do.
Okay, so I just want to add to that. I think, you know, when we talk about empathy, part of the problem is that our empathy is very short-term, and you know, we need to have the long-term view on life. And Sean, you were talking about the unborn, and we need to have empathy for those unborn generations. And I heard Krista Tippett on Being, if you listen to her, talk about the 200-year present. And the 200-year present is, and you can practice this, it kind of shifts how we think about what present time means. Think about the oldest person you knew as a child. Just maybe take a moment. You know, for me, that was my mother's grandmother. And then think about the youngest person that you've held in your arms. And think about them as an adult. That is your and for me, that's my husband's niece, who's like 2 months old. And that creates a 200-year present for you, from the oldest person you knew to the youngest person you know. And that gives you a sense of empathy. So I talk about long life, but you know, we're living longer and longer, but the planet's life is shorter and shorter. So we can live as long as we want, but if the planet is not there for us, then you know, all of this is for nothing.
Yeah, there's I'm going to beat Liz to, you know, before she says turn the guy's mic off. We've been doing this multi-year study with 15 other multinational brands, looking at how do people want to live 10 years from now. And one of the things that came out of this sort of latest round of the studies, we've labeled it sort of cathedral thinking, which is exactly what you're saying, Ayse, right? It's this idea of actually there's a growing interest among people to say, how do we think multi-generational, right? And people are willing to do that, or seem to be. They're signaling that, right? And so we labeled it cathedral thinking. It's this idea of, like, in the medieval ages, you know, they started building a cathedral, and it would be multiple generations before you actually saw its completion, right? there's in certain cultures, there's a growth of that, of saying, actually, let's invest in things that are going to matter for the next generations, right? It's not just for, we have short-term problems. We only have so much time to solve the problem, but it does take an element of actually thinking outside of your own immediate life and thinking beyond and other generations, and what we're leaving sort of as a legacy. And I think there's something there that's really important.
Yeah. I'm glad you brought that up, actually. I had written a note about that cathedral thinking. And then I think just to close it off, David, you have an announcement about a future study, about the future of packaging, perhaps?
Exactly.
I'm so glad I got that right.
You just get very prescient. So we are we're launching a new study looking at the future of packaging, which we're all here looking at and we're talking about. There's clearly change is needed, and yet there's a lot of uncertainties, right, in terms of how that plays out from a systems point of view. And the image of what that looks like is a little less clear. And probably you're all looking and thinking, what is that slide on the screen? And let me sort of give an example. So this is just on the right-hand side, you see an image of an ad we just actually ran. And so partly it's a plug for my ad team. So we ran this on billboards across the U.S. But the concept of the campaign was, how do you as a business be ready for anything? And so each day what we did was we took some of the day's headlines, and in less than 24 hours we actually created an image and then went live on billboards around across the U.S. with whatever that image was. But it's a perfect analogy for what we need to do from a future packaging point of view, right? So the image you're sort of looking at on the right-hand side, it's got like, sustainable supply chains meets, perishable goods, right, which is important for packaging, meets, innovation and AI and robots doing shit, and meets these other random things in the system that actually have a really important role to play within packaging, but we don't always sort of think about. And so the idea behind the future of packaging study is to say, look, how do we take a systems perspective or view to understand what those images might look like for the future, right? And then find a preferred image that we lean into. Now we're looking to do this using a methodology called collaborative foresight. So it is foresight, but within a consortium of organizations that all bring expertise and perspectives that are really important, or the diversity of views that you were talking about. How do we make sure that's represented in the study? Now, this isn't where when I say collaborative foresight, come join, this isn't me saying, I want your money. In fact, actually, SAP's footing the bill for the study. And what we're inviting is organizations to come and participate. Bring your expertise. You bring your experts, your expertise in fairly defined ways, and help us understand what the future is. That's sort of phase one, and come up with a preferred image for what that might look like in a pragmatic way. And then potentially a phase two that says, actually, how do we find some of those organizations to innovate together at a systems level? What does that look like? So if you're interested, my email address is there. By all means, reach out. I can share more on that, what we're doing there. You can find me. I'm kicking around for the day. And then there's a couple SAP folks kicking around as well. Stephen Jameson's one of them. He's going to be on the stage, so you'll see his face. And we'd love to have you participate.
Thank you very much. Now is your moment to shine, audience. This is Q&A. There are some roving microphones around. Don't be shy, and please feel free to ask any questions to anyone who has spoken this afternoon. Yes, in the front.
Hi. Thank you very much, all of you. My name is Laurent. I have a design company in New York. I have the chance to work with small startups that, have with us this kind of conversation every day. But I also work with big guys, those big giant companies. And I'm beyond frustrated about the conversation I have with them for the last 10 years, 20 years. How do we do this? What's your advice here? You work with them too, I guess.
Is that a question for?
That's a question for any of you.
Any of you.
Yeah.
Anyone? Does anyone want to take a shot?
I'll take. Shall I take it first? I'll take a first shot.
Thank you.
Whoops. Sean here. The biggest catalyst for me is risk. So when you're working with the big guys, and we work with Unilever and Kraft Heinz and many of the companies that I'm sure you work with too, we work with them on trying to help them find solutions. And you're right, it is unbelievably difficult because they want perfection on day one. They always want to know, but can that be produced in trillions immediately at the same cost as plastic? Because otherwise, I'm sorry, it's not for me, because my stakeholders won't allow me to do it. So the reason that at A Plastic Planet we work in these two areas of solutions, but also pressurizing governments, pressurizing the UN to have this treaty with teeth, is because we have to have that element of risk. Because the reason that it will go up the chain to the board level and then to the stakeholders and not be at that brand director level who doesn't have the power, the only reason will be it's a have to, not a nice to, with regulation and risk. I mean, that four-letter word, I have learnt, is the most terrifying word in the corporate language.
Yeah, and if I can build on that, because I think, it's risk is definitely top of mind. And I actually think part of the solution is regulation for sure. I think there's an element around collaboration. So there's a few years ago, I was working on a solution for SAP around fraud on the food supply chain. So it's rampant. It's going to grow worse, with in time, right? It's a sustainability challenge that's going to reflect in food. And I remember talking with the head of supply chain for one of the largest grocery retailers in North America. And I said, look, we'll come in and we'll test. We were looking at fish specifically. I said, we'll test your fish for free. It'll cost you nothing. And then if you've got a problem. And he said no. I said, well, why not? It's free. Yeah, you'd be a no too. Yeah.
No,
See,
I'm not saying he doesn't want to know.
He doesn't want to know, exactly. Yeah, you know what I mean? I hadn't clued in at the time. He says, look, here's the problem, Dave. If I have a problem, I have to do something about it. But if I'm the only one who does something about it, and my supply chain does nothing, my competitors do nothing, nothing else, then I'm essentially out of the fish business, and nothing will have changed, right? That's the risk that I think they're all looking at. And so that was a big aha moment for me. And that led to, actually, we need to rethink the way we think about competition and differentiation, in my opinion. So often we because that's the element of risk, right? Is like, well, if I'm no longer competitive, I'll be out of it. You know what I mean? I'll lose, and et cetera, et cetera. But what we often forget is that to compete and differentiate, you actually have to first assimilate and cooperate. It's actually impossible to compete and differentiate unless you assimilate and cooperate first. And a perfect analogy for that is sports. Right, we obsess about our sports teams, what's different about them and blah, blah, blah. But in essence, the difference between the best team and the worst team is almost minimal, right? They've assimilated the same rules, the same player positions, the same stadiums. They cooperate on the schedules. They cooperate on all these things, right, assimilating and cooperating. And the same goes for business. And my takeaway on the food fraud issue was that actually the way this problem has to be solved is before we think about differentiating and competing, we need the organizations to come together and cooperate and assimilate on a new view, a new system that's going to work. And then we sort through the differentiating and competing. But if we don't actually build a vision together of what that future is going to look like and get everyone to assimilate that and agree to it, it's going to be very difficult to make change. And so, in part, that's, again, a plug for the study because it's a collaborative foresight methodology. But
Thank you. Any more questions? Yes, there's a question in the front. All the way in the front right there.
Hello. Thank you all for your lovely perspectives. Similar to the point about reframing in competition in that way, I was wondering if anyone had a perspective on how we might reframe the word consumer, because I think we need to talk about that part of the equation too, if any of this is going to work.
I could say something super quick. Does anybody know the etymology of the word consumer? Please tell me if you do. Because I was fascinated when I found out it is a 15th century word that means to squander or to waste, which kind of says it all, doesn't it? Which is why now we don't want to be defined as consumers. We want to be defined as citizens, the definition of which is to contribute, to belong. So I think it's a great question of, why do we even talk about consumer rights and all the things? What about me, the consumer? Where am I in this equation? And there's a big pushback against, we are, from the minute we're born, we are brought up to be consumers. And it's very, very difficult to fight against that now. That, again, is probably the systemic change that we need to see, is we need to consume less.
Yeah, I mean, it's a tough one. I think that what I would just say is if there's a built-in societal and potentially maybe inherent in sort of being an animal and being alive, desire to consume, then can we, as business designers, take advantage of that to shift people's behavior? It's hard, but that would be the only way that I'd even begin to try to address what you're saying.
I think we're humans, I'm so glad you mentioned that, because I was also thinking, like, why are we even saying this word today? It creates a duality. It labels us into a mindset, but we're simply humans, So thank you.
Yeah, and I love words matter, right, at the end of the day. And I love the citizen, framing, right? Like, we understand our world through metaphor. Really, our the way humans think is through metaphor, primarily. And the metaphor of a consumer versus a citizen is, fundamentally different. Yeah.
We have time for one more question. Is there anyone?
Hi, my question is actually for Lime Loop, Chantal. I have also worked previously in reusable packaging for Loop. So I was their primary reusable packaging designer. And I wanted to learn a little bit more about your development of your reusable packaging and the selection of the materials, and also a little bit about the LCA that you ran. Just around maybe the factoring and transportation and all those things.
Yeah, so I'll start with the material. So we knew from the very beginning that we wanted to pull materials from the waste stream, obviously not rely on any virgin material or minimally. And so we started with looking at a couple of different options that we know, A, would work really well for our packaging, but B, at the end of its life, could be upcycled back into Lime Loop packaging, and that's where we landed with what we did. From the LCA perspective, it starts from the very, very beginning. So that production of that packaging, the shipping to a manufacturer, and then those back and forth trips that they're making between the consumer and the distribution center, all of that is factored in compared to both single use and then recycled packaging as well. And sorry, there's one more other part of your question, was there?
Just like the span of the transportation, if you have to operate from a single point, if you can only work within 25 miles, 500 miles, if there's something.
Great question. So the LCA today takes into account that the package will go back to the place of origin. Kind of on this the conversation around collaboration, our dream model is that it goes back to the closest place of need. It's a big reason why you saw our packaging was this plain black packaging, no logos, no nothing. We want a world where it gets shipped from, Rothy's distribution center in New York to their store in LA, and then it stays there and goes to Reformation's LA DC center and then gets used there, right? So there's no reason that package needs to go back across the country empty to be used again and again. So how do we create this ecosystem where it's not my packaging, it's our packaging collectively as brands that we're using to make it as seamless as possible.
Thank you. So interesting. Thank you very much. How about a round of applause for our panelists?